Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now, let's step inside. Short, cinematic narration. Inside ADX Florence, nothing is accidental. Not the walls, not the silence, not even the food. Here, men considered too dangerous for any other prison spend up to 23 hours a day alone. No conversations, no shared spaces, no human contact. And every day at the same exact times, a meal slides through a narrow steel slot. No words are spoken. No eye contact is made. The slot closes, and the silence returns. To the outside world, prison food is often dismissed as low quality or unimportant. But inside this place, food serves a different purpose. It marks time. It enforces routine. It shapes behavior without force, punishment, or negotiation. There are no dining halls here. No choices. No comfort. Every tray looks the same. Every schedule is fixed. Every day repeats. And over time, that repetition begins to change how a person thinks, how they react, and how they survive. This is not a story about hunger. It is not a story about cruelty. It is a story about control, about how something as ordinary as a meal becomes one of the most powerful psychological tools inside America's most secure prison. ADX Florence and the architecture of control. To understand how food changes behavior inside ADX Florence, it is first necessary to understand the environment in which that food exists. ADX Florence is not simply a prison. It is a system of control built into concrete, steel, and silence. Located in a remote area of Colorado, far from major cities, the prison was designed with single purpose: to contain individuals deemed too dangerous, too disruptive, or too influential to be housed anywhere else in the federal prison system. Escape attempts, violence against staff, organizing other inmates, or continued criminal influence from inside prison walls. These are the behaviors ADX Florence was built to neutralize. The solution was not just higher walls or thicker doors. It was total predictability. From the moment an inmate arrives, unpredictability is removed from daily life. Movement is restricted. Interaction is minimized. Choice is eliminated wherever possible. Every system inside the prison is designed to function the same way every day without deviation. Food is part of that system. At ADX Florence, control is not enforced through constant confrontation. Instead, it is achieved through structure so rigid that resistance gradually loses its meaning. Inmates are not overwhelmed with punishment. They are surrounded by routine. Cells are small, solid, and sound-dampened. Doors are thick steel, operated remotely. Windows are narrow and positioned to limit any view of the outside world. Lights follow schedule. Airflow is regulated. Noise is minimal. This environment is not chaotic. It is calm, and that calm is intentional. Psychologically, chaos breeds reaction. Predictability suppresses it. When every day unfolds exactly the same way, the mind adapts by conserving energy. Emotional responses soften. Impulses dull. Over time, behavior stabilizes, not because the individual has changed, but because the environment allows no space for variation. Meals arrive within the same framework. They do not interrupt the day. They do not stand out. They reinforce the rhythm. At fixed times, trays are delivered through slots in the cell doors. The process is mechanical and silent. Officers do not speak. There is no announcement, no acknowledgement. The tray appears and then it is gone. For many inmates, this becomes one of the few external events that punctuate the day. Not recreation, not conversation, not work. Food. This is not accidental. In traditional prisons, meals serve multiple functions. They are social. They provide movement. They offer choice, however limited. Inmates walk to dining halls. They sit near others. They speak, observe, react. Even in restrictive environments, meals create moments of interaction. ADX Florence removes all of that. There are no dining halls, no lines, no tables. Eating is a solitary act performed inside a cell designed to limit sensory input. Over time, this separation transforms the role food plays in the inmate's mind. It is no longer associated with pleasure or social connection. It becomes associated with timekeeping and compliance. Breakfast means the day has begun. Lunch means time has passed. Dinner signals the approach of night. Food becomes a clock. This is one of the most subtle forms of behavioral control. When meals are the most reliable markers of time, inmates begin to structure their thoughts and expectations around them. The day is no longer shaped by personal intention, but by institutional rhythm. In this way, food quietly reinforces the authority of the system without force. ADX Florence operates on the principle that dangerous behavior thrives in environments where individuals have room to maneuver, influence others, or assert dominance. By removing interaction and choice, the prison limits those opportunities. Even something as small as choosing when to eat or what to eat is considered unnecessary risk. Choice creates preference. Preference creates desire. Desire creates frustration. At ADX Florence, frustration is something the institution actively avoids, not out of compassion, but out of control strategy. Frustrated inmates are unpredictable. Unpredictability leads to incidents. So meals are stripped of anything that could provoke emotional reaction. The menu is repetitive. The presentation is plain. The experience is emotionally neutral. This does not mean the food is insufficient. Nutritional requirements are met. Calories are calculated. Health standards are followed. But satisfaction is not a priority. From an administrative standpoint, food exists to sustain the body, not stimulate the mind. Over time, this approach has measurable effects. When inmates know exactly what to expect, anticipation disappears. There is nothing to look forward to, but also nothing to dread. Emotional spikes flatten. Anger has nowhere to build. Excitement has nowhere to form. The mind adapts by narrowing its focus. In this environment, compliance becomes less about obedience and more about conservation. Fighting the system requires energy, and energy is a limited resource. When resistance changes nothing, it gradually fades. Food plays a quiet role in this process, not by withholding, not by punishment, but by sameness. Inmates do not receive meals as rewards. They are not typically denied food as discipline. Instead, food becomes part of the unchanging background of existence. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of ADX Florence. To outsiders, control is often imagined as aggressive, guards shouting orders, constant discipline, visible force. But here, control is subtle. It operates through absence rather than action. Absence of noise, absence of interaction, absence of choice. Food fits perfectly into this philosophy. By making meals predictable and emotionally neutral, the prison reduces one of the most common sources of tension in correctional facilities. There are no disputes over seating, no conflicts in line, no trading, stealing, or negotiating. There is nothing to negotiate. This does not mean inmates stop thinking about food. In fact, for some, food becomes more significant precisely because it is one of the few consistent external events left. Some inmates pace their day around meals. Others use eating to mark time, stretching meals out slowly to break the monotony. Some lose interest entirely, but all of them are shaped by the same structure. The architecture of ADX Florence does not end with walls and doors. It extends into daily routines so deeply that even the act of eating reinforces the institution's authority. Every tray that slides through a steel slot is a reminder. The system controls time. The system controls space. The system controls routine. And in an environment where control is absolute, behavior adapts accordingly. By the time an inmate has spent months or years inside the structure, food is no longer just nourishment. It is part of the prison's psychological framework, reinforcing stability, predictability, and submission without a word ever being spoken. This foundation sets the stage for everything that follows. Prison food policy inside a Supermax facility. Inside ADX Florence, food is governed not by tradition or preference, but by policy. Every meal served inside the prison exists because it meets a written requirement. Calories are calculated. Portions are standardized. Menus are approved through layers of administration. Nothing is improvised, and nothing is left to individual discretion. In a facility where control is paramount, food must be predictable, measurable, and defensible on paper. This is where the reality of prison food inside a Supermax diverges sharply from popular myths. ADX Florence does not operate on starvation or intentional deprivation. Inmates are not slowly weakened through hunger. Instead, the institution provides meals designed to meet basic nutritional needs while eliminating anything unnecessary. The goal is not satisfaction but stability. Federal prison guidelines require that inmates receive enough calories to maintain health. Meals must include protein, carbohydrates, and essential nutrients. These standards exist to prevent malnutrition, illness, and legal liability. ADX Florence complies with these requirements precisely. But compliance does not mean comfort. The food served inside the facility is intentionally simple. Ingredients are chosen for consistency, cost efficiency, and ease of preparation. Seasoning is minimal. Textures are repetitive. Presentation is functional. There is no variation designed to stimulate appetite or enjoyment. This is not an oversight. It is a design choice. From an institutional perspective, food that creates excitement also creates emotional response. Anticipation can lead to frustration. Preference can lead to conflict. Complaints can lead to confrontation. In a population already considered high risk, these outcomes are avoided wherever possible. By removing pleasure from meals, the institution removes one more variable. Each tray contains what is required, nothing more. Portions are identical from cell to cell. Inmates do not receive different meals based on seniority, behavior, or status. There is no hierarchy expressed through food. This uniformity serves a psychological purpose. In many prisons, food becomes currency. Inmates trade items, argue over portions, or establish dominance through control of meals. At ADX Florence, this economy does not exist. There is nothing to trade and no opportunity to interact. Meals are delivered individually, directly into cells. There are no communal spaces where food could become a social object. The act of eating is reduced to a solitary function. This has profound behavioral implications. When food carries no social meaning, it no longer reinforces identity or status. Inmates are not known for what they eat, how much they eat, or who they eat with. Food does not create alliances or rivalries. Instead, it becomes neutral. Over time, this neutrality affects how inmates relate to their own bodies. Eating becomes automatic. Hunger cues are ignored or delayed. Appetite becomes inconsistent. Some inmates report eating simply because it is time, not because they feel hungry. This disconnect is a direct result of routine-driven consumption. At fixed times, food arrives. At fixed times, it is eaten. The body adjusts to the schedule rather than the other way around. This is one of the quiet ways behavior is shaped inside ADX Florence. When biological rhythms are synchronized with institutional routines, autonomy diminishes. The individual no longer decides when to eat or when to rest. The system decides. Food policy reinforces this dynamic. Menus repeat on a cycle. Inmates quickly learn what to expect days in advance. There is no surprise, no novelty. Over time, anticipation fades. Meals lose emotional significance. This emotional flattening is not incidental. Psychological research has shown that repeated exposure to the same stimuli reduces emotional response. The brain stops reacting to familiar inputs. In the context of ADX Florence, this means food stops provoking reaction. Anger over poor quality fades. Hope for something better disappears. Desire weakens. What remains is acceptance. From an administrative standpoint, this is effective. Fewer emotional reactions mean fewer behavioral incidents. Calm inmates are easier to manage. Predictable routines reduce stress on staff and reduce the risk of escalation. Food policy plays a central role in this outcome. Another key aspect of Supermax food policy is absence of choice. In many correctional facilities, inmates may select from limited options. They may choose between items or opt out of certain foods. At ADX Florence, choice is minimal or non-existent. Meals are delivered as they are. Acceptance is assumed. Choice introduces decision-making, and decision-making introduces frustration when preferences cannot be met. Removing choice eliminates that pathway entirely. This approach extends to religious and medical accommodations, which are handled through rigid procedures rather than flexibility. Even these accommodations are standardized, ensuring that difference does not become distinction. No one stands out because of food. This is critical in a facility designed to suppress individual influence. Food policy also intersects with security in less obvious ways. Preparation and delivery processes are tightly controlled to prevent contamination, weaponization, or manipulation. Packaging is simple. Utensils are limited or modified. Everything is designed to reduce risk. From tray composition to delivery timing, every detail is scrutinized. And once again, the result is sameness. For inmates, this sameness becomes inescapable. Day after day, the same meals reinforce the same message. The system does not respond to individual preference. Over time, many inmates stop thinking about food entirely. It becomes background noise in their mental landscape. This disengagement is a form of adaptation. When a person cannot influence an outcome, the mind often withdraws emotional investment. This withdrawal is a survival mechanism. By caring less, the individual protects themselves from frustration. In a Supermax environment, this emotional narrowing can feel necessary, but it also reshapes behavior. Inmates become less reactive, less expressive, less outwardly emotional. Food policy contributes to this change by removing one of the most basic sources of daily variation. It is important to understand that this is not accidental cruelty. It is institutional logic applied consistently. ADX Florence was designed to manage individuals considered capable of extreme violence or disruption. Every system inside the prison serves that goal. Food policy is no exception. By making meals predictable, neutral, and solitary, the institution reduces emotional volatility. Behavior becomes easier to forecast. The environment becomes quieter. This quiet, however, comes at a psychological cost. Over long periods, emotional flattening can extend beyond meals. Pleasure becomes harder to experience. Motivation declines. Interest in self-care may fade. But from the perspective of control, these outcomes are secondary. What matters is order. Food policy inside ADX Florence does not aim to reform, reward, or punish. It aims to stabilize. It removes one of the most powerful emotional drivers in human life and replaces it with routine. And in a place where control is absolute, routine becomes the most effective tool of all. This understanding of food as policy, not sustenance, sets the stage for the next layer of influence: the role of silence, isolation, and the absence of human interaction during meals. Silence, isolation, and eating alone. Narrator calm, restrained, observational. Inside ADX Florence, silence is not a byproduct of incarceration. It is a design feature. Every aspect of the prison is engineered to reduce sound, interaction, and sensory input. Thick concrete walls absorb noise. Solid steel doors block voices. Movement is staggered to prevent overlap. Even footsteps are softened by distance and structure. Within this environment, meals are delivered in near total silence. There is no announcement, no verbal exchange, no acknowledgement. A tray slides through a narrow steel slot at the base of the cell door. The slot closes, the sound disappears, and the inmate is left alone again. For most people, eating is one of the most social acts in daily life. Families gather around tables. Friends talk over meals. Even strangers share space in restaurants. Conversation, eye contact, and shared experience are inseparable from eating. At ADX Florence, all of that is removed. Eating becomes a solitary act performed in an environment designed to limit stimulation. The cell is quiet. The walls are bare. There is no one to observe, no one to respond, no one to acknowledge presence. Over time, this absence changes how food is experienced. When meals are eaten alone without conversation or social cues, the brain receives less stimulation. Eating becomes less engaging. Taste dulls. Texture matters less. The act itself becomes mechanical. This is not immediate. It develops gradually. At first, inmates may pay close attention to meals. They may inspect trays, notice small changes, or mentally compare one meal to the last. But as days turn into months, that attention fades. There is no audience, no response. The meal does not begin a conversation or interrupt the silence. It briefly occupies it, then disappears. This creates a psychological shift. Silence amplifies awareness. In a quiet environment, internal thoughts become louder. Eating alone provides no distraction from those thoughts. For some inmates, meals become moments of heightened reflection. For others, they become moments to avoid thinking altogether. Some eat quickly, finishing the meal as fast as possible to escape the awareness of isolation. Others eat slowly, stretching the process to give structure to time that would otherwise feel empty. Both behaviors are adaptive. Without social context, food becomes one of the few activities that can be controlled internally. Speed, order, and timing become personal choices in an environment where almost nothing else is. This small control matters. In a prison where autonomy is stripped away, even minor decisions, when take a bite, which item to eat first, can feel significant. These micro-decisions help preserve a sense of self, but they also reinforce isolation. Eating alone, day after day, removes opportunities for emotional expression. There is no laughter, no complaint, no shared reaction. Over time, this leads to emotional flattening. Psychologically, humans regulate emotion through interaction. Facial expressions, tone of voice, and shared experience help process feelings. Without those outlets, emotions are internalized. Inside ADX Florence, meals do not provide relief from isolation. They reinforce it. The silence during food delivery is especially significant. In many prisons, meal distribution involves brief exchanges, commands, acknowledgments, or casual remarks. These interactions, however limited, provide recognition. They remind inmates they are seen and heard. At ADX Florence, this recognition is absent. Officers deliver trays without speaking. The process is designed to be neutral and efficient. From a security perspective, this reduces risk. There is no opportunity for manipulation, confrontation, or escalation. But psychologically, the effect is profound. Receiving food without acknowledgement reinforces a sense of invisibility. No words confirm presence. The tray appears and disappears without human connection. For some inmates, this becomes one of the most difficult aspects of daily life. Food arrives, but it does not come from a person. It comes from the system. This distinction matters. When human interaction is removed from essential functions like eating, the institution itself becomes a dominant presence. Authority is not embodied in individuals but in procedure. This reinforces submission, not through force. Silence also affects perception of time. Without conversation or shared activity, meals become the primary markers of the day. The silence before a meal feels different from the silence after it. Hunger builds quietly. Satisfaction fades quickly. Time stretches. Inmates often report that days blur together, with meals acting as the only clear divisions. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner become the anchors around which memory is organized. This reliance on meals for temporal structure deepens their psychological importance. Food is no longer just nourishment. It is orientation. Eating alone also alters sensory experience. In social settings, attention is divided between food and conversation. Alone, attention turns inward. Taste, texture, and smell are perceived differently. Some inmates become hypersensitive to small details. Others experience sensory dulling. Both responses are common in environments of extreme isolation. The lack of stimulation changes how the brain processes input. Over time, the pleasure normally associated with eating diminishes. Food becomes neutral. In some cases, it becomes irrelevant. This emotional detachment can feel protective. When nothing is enjoyable, disappointment loses power. This adaptation helps inmates endure long-term isolation, but also reshapes behavior in lasting ways. Eating alone for years can erode social habits. Former inmates often describe difficulty adjusting to shared meals after release. The presence of others feels intrusive. Conversation during eating feels unnatural. What was once normal becomes overwhelming. Inside ADX Florence, this transformation begins quietly, one meal at a time. Silence during meals also reduces conflict. No verbal disputes. No dominance displays. From an institutional perspective, this is effective. Food-related incidents are common in other correctional settings. By isolating meals, ADX Florence eliminates this category of risk entirely. Behavior stabilizes. But stabilization comes at the cost of social functioning. When eating becomes a solitary act for extended periods, social skills atrophy. The ability to share space, read cues, or engage casually weakens. This is not always visible from the outside, but internally, it reshapes how individuals relate to others. Food, once a social bridge, becomes a personal routine. This reinforces a prison's broader goal, preventing inmates from forming relationships, alliances, or influence networks. Meals are not just silent. They are isolating by design. The longer an inmate remains in this environment, the more deeply ingrained these patterns become. Eating alone feels normal. Silence feels expected. Interaction feels risky. And in a system built on minimizing risk, this outcome is considered success. Silence, isolation, and solitary eating work together to shape behavior subtly but consistently. There is no single moment of change, no dramatic shift. Instead, behavior is reshaped through repetition. Each meal reinforces the same message. You are alone. You are controlled. You are expected to adapt. And most do. This quiet transformation prepares the ground for the next mechanism of control, routine, and repetition, and how they condition behavior over time. Routine, repetition, and behavioral conditioning. Inside ADX Florence, routine is not simply a way to organize a day. It is the foundation of behavioral control. Every action inside the prison follows a schedule that rarely changes. Lights turn on and off at fixed times. Recreation, when permitted, follows strict windows. Showers, movements, and cell checks occur according to rigid patterns. Nothing is spontaneous, and nothing is negotiable. Food fits perfectly into this structure. Meals arrive at the same times every day. The delivery method does not change. The process does not vary. The experience is identical whether it is the inmate's first week or their 10th year. This repetition is not accidental. It is deliberate. Psychologically, repetition trains expectation. When events occur consistently, the brain stops reacting to them emotionally. Surprise disappears. Anxiety diminishes. Resistance weakens. Inside ADX Florence, routine becomes a conditioning mechanism. At first, new inmates often resist the schedule internally. They watch the clock. They wait for meals. They count minutes. Food becomes something to anticipate, not because it is enjoyable, but because it breaks the silence. But anticipation fades. When every day unfolds the same way, expectation loses its charge. Meals no longer feel like events. They feel like inevitabilities. This shift marks the beginning of behavioral conditioning. Conditioning does not require punishment. It does not require reward. It requires consistency. And ADX Florence provides consistency in its purest form. Meals reinforce this consistency 3 times a day. The body adapts first. Hunger cues begin to align with the institutional schedule rather than internal signals. Inmates report feeling hungry shortly before meals arrive, even if physical activity has been minimal. The body learns when food will come and adjusts accordingly. This synchronization is subtle but powerful. When biological rhythms align with institutional routines, autonomy erodes. The individual no longer responds to personal need, but to external structure. The mind follows. Once hunger, satisfaction, and rest are regulated externally, decision-making narrows. There is less need to plan, less reason to hope, less opportunity to resist. Routine removes uncertainty, and uncertainty is where rebellion lives. Inside ADX Florence, food eliminates uncertainty. Meals are never early. They are never late. They never change. This reliability creates a psychological environment where deviation feels impossible. Inmates begin to internalize the schedule. They know when the tray will arrive without checking the clock. Time is no longer measured by hours or minutes, but by meals. Breakfast means morning has arrived. Lunch means the day is halfway done. Dinner means night is approaching. This is how routine replaces personal agency. Food becomes a metronome, regulating not just hunger, but thought. In this environment, resistance takes energy. To resist routine, an inmate must actively oppose something that never responds. Complaints do nothing. Anger changes nothing. Refusal achieves nothing. Over time, the mind adapts by conserving effort. This is not submission in the dramatic sense. It is resignation. Behavior stabilizes because there is no benefit to instability. Routine also suppresses impulsivity. In unpredictable environments, people act impulsively to regain control. In highly predictable environments, impulsivity has no outlet. There is nothing to disrupt, no moment to exploit. Food's predictability removes one of the most common triggers for impulsive behavior: uncertainty about access. In many prisons, delayed meals, missing trays, or unequal portions cause agitation and conflict. At ADX Florence, this does not happen. Every inmate receives the same thing, the same way, at the same time. This equality is not fairness. It is control. By removing variability, the institution removes emotional comparison. Inmates do not measure themselves against others based on food. There is no envy, no resentment, no perceived favoritism. Everyone is equally restricted. Routine also creates dependency. When every aspect of daily life is regulated, the inmate becomes dependent on the institution for structure. Food reinforces this dependency because it is essential and unavoidable. You cannot skip eating forever. You cannot negotiate it. You cannot replace it. By controlling food delivery, the institution controls one of the most fundamental human needs. This control is quiet but absolute. Over time, inmates begin to organize their mental energy around the schedule rather than personal goals. The day becomes something to endure rather than shape. This has long-term consequences. Motivation declines. Initiative fades. Creative thinking narrows. When nothing responds to effort, effort disappears. From a behavioral standpoint, this creates compliance, not because inmates agree with the system, but because the system leaves no space for alternative behavior. Food plays a central role in this outcome because it is the most consistent interaction inmates have with the institution. Every tray reinforces the same lesson. The system decides. You respond. Repetition also dulls emotional memory. When meals are identical day after day, they stop forming distinct memories. One meal blends into the next. Weeks blur. Months disappear. This temporal flattening affects behavior. Without distinct memories, reflection becomes difficult. Goals feel distant. The future feels abstract. This psychological narrowing helps inmates survive long-term isolation, but also reduces engagement with the outside world. Routine creates a closed loop. Food arrives. Food is eaten. Time passes. Food arrives again. Within this loop, behavior becomes predictable. From the institution's perspective, predictability is safety. Predictable inmates are easier to manage. They follow rules not because they're persuaded, but because deviation feels pointless. This is behavioral conditioning at its most subtle. There are no visible punishments, no dramatic enforcement, just repetition. And repetition, applied relentlessly, reshapes behavior. Importantly, this conditioning does not rely on hunger or deprivation. It relies on inevitability. Inmates are fed. They are sustained. They are stabilized. But they are also constrained. Routine teaches that effort does not change outcomes. Over time, this lesson generalizes beyond food. Inmates may stop requesting changes, stop filing complaints, stop asserting preferences. This withdrawal is adaptive in the short term. It reduces stress. It conserves emotional energy, but it also reinforces passivity. Food, as part of the daily routine, plays a key role in teaching this lesson. Every meal says the same thing without words. This will not change. And when nothing changes, behavior adapts to fit the environment. This is why routine is so powerful inside ADX Florence. It does not force behavior. It shapes it. By the time an inmate has spent years inside the system, routine feels natural. The absence of choice feels normal. Silence feels expected. Food is no longer noticed. It simply arrives. This normalization is the endpoint of conditioning. And once conditioning is complete, control no longer requires effort. The system runs itself. This chapter reveals how routine and repetition, reinforced daily through food, condition behavior inside ADX Florence. But conditioning is only part of the story. Psychological effects of long-term isolation and food. By the time food, silence, and routine have fully merged inside ADX Florence, the most significant changes are no longer visible from the outside. They happen internally. Long-term isolation does not alter behavior through a single breaking point. It reshapes the mind slowly through repetition and deprivation of normal human feedback. Food, because it is constant, predictable, and unavoidable, becomes deeply entangled in this psychological transformation. At ADX Florence, inmates are not only isolated from other people, they are isolated from stimulation, variation, and emotional contrast. Days differ very little from one another. Weeks blur together. Months pass with few distinguishing moments. In this environment, the mind searches for anchors. Food becomes one of them. Meals arrive 3 times a day reliably. For many inmates, they become the strongest remaining markers of time and continuity. When almost nothing else changes, food becomes the structure around which thought organizes itself. But this dependence carries a cost. Psychologically, humans associate eating with reward, comfort, and connection. From childhood onward, meals are linked to safety, family, and shared experience. In normal life, food is emotional. Inside ADX Florence, that emotional context is stripped away. Meals are eaten alone in silence without variation. Over time, the emotional meaning of food erodes. What remains is function. This shift affects mood. Many inmates report emotional flattening, the gradual loss of strong emotional responses. Happiness becomes muted. Anger becomes quieter. Sadness becomes dull rather than sharp. Food plays a role in this flattening. When meals provide no pleasure and no disappointment, the emotional system recalibrates. The brain learns not to expect reward. Dopamine responses weaken. Motivation declines. This is not depression in the dramatic sense. It is emotional narrowing. The world becomes smaller. Inmates adapt by lowering expectations. When nothing is pleasurable, nothing can be taken away. This emotional withdrawal is protective, but it also reshapes behavior. Eating becomes automatic. Some inmates stop paying attention to taste altogether. Others develop rigid eating patterns, always eating items in the same order at the same pace. These rituals provide a sense of control in an environment where control is scarce. Ritual replaces pleasure. This is a common psychological response to long-term confinement. When choice is removed, routine becomes personal. Small habits take on outsized importance. Food enables this because it is one of the few repeated activities inmates can structure internally. However, these coping strategies can deepen isolation. Rituals become inward-facing. They do not involve others. They do not invite interaction. Over time, social thinking weakens. Another psychological effect emerges: detachment from the body. In many cases, inmates report losing normal hunger cues. They eat because food arrives, not because they feel hungry. Fullness becomes irrelevant. Appetite becomes inconsistent. The body adapts to the schedule, not the individual. This detachment can create a sense of unreality. The body feels like an object being maintained rather than a self being lived in. Food becomes maintenance rather than nourishment. This is a subtle but significant psychological shift. In extreme isolation, people often experience depersonalization, a feeling of being disconnected from oneself. Food, stripped of pleasure and agency, reinforces this feeling. Eating becomes something that happens, not something chosen. Over long periods, this can alter self-perception. Inmates may begin to see themselves less as active participants in life and more as passive subjects within a system. This perception shapes behavior. Passivity increases. Initiative declines. Food, once associated with desire and agency, becomes associated with compliance and inevitability. Another major psychological consequence is the way isolation alters memory and anticipation. In normal life, people remember meals, special dinners, shared moments, celebrations. Food creates memory landmarks. Inside ADX Florence, meals are indistinguishable. When meals do not vary, they do not form distinct memories. One blends into the next. Over time, memory becomes compressed. Long stretches of time feel empty when recalled. This memory flattening affects future orientation. Without memorable experiences, the future feels abstract. Planning becomes difficult. Hope becomes vague. Food, instead of marking progress, reinforces stagnation. This can contribute to a sense of suspended existence, where life feels paused rather than lived. For some inmates, this leads to apathy. They stop caring about meals altogether. Trays are eaten mechanically or partially. Appetite fades. Food becomes background noise. From a survival standpoint, this detachment reduces suffering, but also deepens psychological withdrawal. For others, food becomes the opposite, an obsession. In an environment with few stimuli, the mind fixates on what remains. Some inmates think constantly about meals. They count hours until delivery. They analyze portions and textures in detail. This fixation is another coping mechanism. When food becomes one of the only external events, attention gravitates toward it. But even this attention is solitary and internal. There is no shared discussion, no feedback. Whether food becomes irrelevant or obsessive, both outcomes reflect the same underlying condition: deprivation of normal psychological inputs. Long-term isolation also affects emotional regulation. Without social cues, it becomes harder to gauge appropriate emotional response. Eating alone offers no opportunity to mirror behavior or receive feedback. This can lead to emotional rigidity. Inmates may struggle to experience pleasure even when circumstances improve. Food, which should be rewarding, remains neutral. Former ADX inmates often report difficulty adjusting to normal eating environments after release or transfer. Restaurants feel overwhelming. Choices feel stressful. Eating with others feels uncomfortable. Food, once stripped of social meaning, does not easily regain it. This is one of the long-lasting effects of long-term isolation combined with controlled routine. Importantly, these psychological changes are not the result of overt punishment. They are the cumulative effect of structure. Food is not used to harm. It is used to stabilize. But stabilization has side effects. By removing pleasure, variety, and social context from eating, the institution reduces volatility, but it also reduces emotional richness. Behavior becomes calm, but also flattened. From the institution's perspective, this outcome may appear successful. Inmates are quiet. Incidents are rare. The environment is controlled. But internally, the psychological cost accumulates. Food, because it is fundamental and repeated, plays a central role in this accumulation. It reinforces isolation. It reinforces routine. It reinforces emotional narrowing. Over years, these effects become normalized. Inmates adapt so thoroughly that the absence of stimulation feels natural. Silence becomes comfortable. Repetition feels safe. And food, once a source of pleasure and connection, becomes a neutral object delivered by a system, consumed alone and forgotten quickly. This psychological transformation is not immediate. It unfolds quietly, meal by meal, day by day. By the time it is complete, behavior has changed not through force, but through adaptation. Adaptation, coping, and survival. By the time inmates have spent years inside ADX Florence, survival is no longer about resistance. It is about adaptation. In an environment where food is controlled, silence is constant, and routine never changes, the mind does what it has always done under extreme conditions. It adjusts. These adjustments are rarely dramatic. They are quiet, incremental, and deeply personal. Food, once again, plays a central role in this process. One of the first coping strategies to emerge is mental compartmentalization. Inmates begin to separate their internal world from the external structure imposed on them. Meals become part of the external world, something that happens to them, while thoughts, memories, and imagination become internal refuges. Eating is performed without emotional investment. This detachment is protective. By caring less about food, inmates reduce one potential source of frustration: When expectations disappear, disappointment follows. Over time, many inmates stop evaluating meals entirely. Taste, texture, and portion size become irrelevant. The tray is eaten because it is there, not because it is desired. This emotional distance is not numbness. It is strategy. Another common adaptation is ritualization. In an environment where choice is scarce, repetition becomes a form of control. Some inmates eat meals in the same order every day. Others take the same number of bites. Some divide food into precise portions before eating. These rituals create predictability within predictability. They provide a sense of authorship over an act that is otherwise imposed. Even though the system controls what arrives and when, the inmate controls how it is consumed. This small autonomy matters. Rituals also anchor time. When days blur together, repeated actions give shape to memory. Even if the meal itself is forgettable, the act of eating in a familiar way creates continuity. For others, delay becomes a coping mechanism. Some inmates eat slowly, stretching meals as long as possible. The act of eating becomes an event rather than a task. It breaks the silence. It occupies attention. It marks the passage of time. In a place where time feels endless, slowing it down paradoxically makes it manageable. Others do the opposite. They eat quickly, finishing meals in minutes. For them, eating is something to get through, not experience. Speed reduces awareness of isolation. The tray is removed, and the cell returns to silence. Both responses serve the same purpose, reducing psychological strain. Food adapts to the inmate, not the other way around. Another critical coping strategy is cognitive reframing. Some inmates redefine the role of food entirely. Instead of viewing meals as a reminder of restriction, they view them as proof of order. Predictability becomes comfort rather than constraint. This reframing allows inmates to interpret routine as safety. When nothing changes, nothing unexpected can happen. In a population accustomed to violence and chaos, this stability can feel reassuring. Food becomes a symbol of consistency rather than deprivation. This mindset shift is subtle but powerful. It reduces anxiety. It reduces vigilance. It conserves emotional energy. For long-term survival, conserving energy is essential. Some inmates also develop internal schedules that revolve around meals. They plan mental activities, reading, writing, thinking, exercising, around food delivery times. Meals become transitions. Before the meal, one mental state. After the meal, another. This structuring helps break the day into manageable segments. Instead of enduring a full day of isolation, the inmate endures smaller blocks of time. Food makes this segmentation possible. Another adaptation involves memory management. Inmates learn not to dwell on past meals or anticipate future ones. Dwelling creates longing. Anticipation creates frustration. By focusing only on the present meal, psychological load is reduced. This present-focused mindset resembles mindfulness, though it emerges out of necessity rather than practice. The mind narrows its horizon to survive. Over years, this narrowing becomes habitual. This has behavioral consequences. Inmates become less expressive, less reactive, less outwardly emotional. This is not because emotions disappear, but because expressing them serves no purpose. Food reinforces this lesson daily. There is no response to complaint, no reward for enthusiasm, no punishment for indifference. Emotional expression fades because it is inefficient. Another important coping mechanism is identity separation. Inmates begin to distinguish between who they are internally and the role they occupy externally. Food, delivered impersonally, reinforces the idea that the external system does not define the internal self. Eating becomes an act performed by the body, not the identity. This separation helps preserve a sense of self under conditions designed to erase individuality. However, it also deepens attachment. When bodily needs are met mechanically, the connection between mind and body weakens. Food nourishes the body, but not the sense of self. This disconnect can persist long after confinement. For some inmates, food becomes symbolic rather than functional. The arrival of a tray signals order. The removal signals time passing. The content itself matters less than the process. In this way, Food becomes language. It says, "You are still here. The system is still operating. The day is moving forward." This symbolism helps anchor reality in an environment where sensory input is limited, but it also reinforces dependence on the institution for orientation. Survival strategies are not uniform. Different inmates adapt differently based on personality, history, and mental resilience. But the common thread is adjustment, not resistance. Food rarely becomes a site of rebellion. Refusing meals is possible, but sustained refusal carries physical consequences and rarely changes the system. Most inmates learn quickly that resistance through food is ineffective. Adaptation becomes a rational choice. This adaptation shapes long-term behavior. Inmates who have adjusted deeply often struggle when routines change. Transfers, releases, or policy shifts can cause anxiety. Predictability, once imposed, becomes needed. Food, which once symbolized control, becomes a source of stability. This reversal is one of the most profound outcomes of long-term confinement. What began as restriction becomes structure. What began as control becomes comfort. From the institution's perspective, this adaptation is success. Inmates are calm. Incidents are rare. The environment remains controlled. But from a human perspective, the cost is complex. Survival strategies that work inside ADX Florence may not translate outside it. Emotional narrowing, detachment, and ritualization can hinder reintegration. Food, once neutralized, may remain emotionally distant. Former inmates often describe difficulty reconnecting food with pleasure or social connection. Meals feel transactional. Eating with others feels exposed. The adaptations that preserve stability inside the prison can become obstacles beyond it. Inside ADX Florence, however, survival takes priority over future adjustment. Food, routine, and silence create an environment where adaptation is necessary. Those who survive are not those who resist hardest, but those who learn how to align themselves with the system. This alignment is not agreement. It is endurance. Each meal reinforces the same reality. The environment will not change, so behavior does. By the time an inmate has fully adapted, food is no longer noticed. It arrives, is consumed, and it disappears. And in that quiet process, survival continues, one meal at a time. Inside ADX Florence, nothing announces itself as punishment. There are no dramatic confrontations, no daily spectacles of force, no obvious moments where control feels violent. Instead, control is embedded in routine. It is built into walls, schedules, silence, and into something most people would never think twice about: food. Throughout this documentary, we have examined how meals inside ADX Florence are not designed to comfort, reward, or rehabilitate. They are designed to stabilize, to standardize, to remove unpredictability from an environment housing individuals considered too dangerous for unpredictability. Food arrives on time. Food looks the same. Food is eaten alone. And in that repetition, behavior changes, not because inmates are starved, not because food is used as overt punishment, but because food becomes part of a closed system where choice disappears and expectation fades. Over time, meals stop being experiences. They become signals. Signals that time is moving. Signals that the system is functioning. Signals that nothing will change today. This is the quiet power of routine. In most human societies, food carries meaning far beyond nutrition. It represents culture, family, identity, and care. It is how people gather, how they connect, how they mark celebrations and mourn losses. Inside ADX Florence, all of that meaning is intentionally removed. Food is reduced to function. This reduction is not accidental. It is consistent with a prison philosophy built on eliminating variables. When food no longer excites, frustrates, or divides, it becomes easier to manage the environment. Emotional volatility decreases. Behavior becomes more predictable. From a security standpoint, this works, but the psychological consequences remain. As we've seen, long-term exposure to the system reshapes how people think, feel, and cope. Emotional responses narrow. Pleasure fades. Ritual replaces enjoyment. Silence becomes familiar. Food, something that should connect the body and the mind, becomes neutral, and neutrality sustained over years, leaves a mark. For some inmates, adaptation becomes so complete that normal life feels foreign afterward. Social meals feel overwhelming. Choices feel burdensome. Pleasure feels distant. What once symbolized control becomes something they rely on. Structure without surprise. This is the paradox of extreme confinement. The very systems designed to suppress dangerous behavior also reshape the human experience in ways that are difficult to reverse. ADX Florence was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be effective. And by many measures, it is. Violence is rare. Escapes do not happen. Order is maintained. But effectiveness raises questions. When control is achieved not through force, but through deprivation of normal human experience, what is the cost? When behavior is shaped quietly, without visible punishment, how do we measure harm? Food sits at the center of these questions because it touches something fundamental. Eating is universal. It is human. It is unavoidable. When that act is stripped of choice, social connection, and pleasure for years on end, the consequences extend beyond the prison walls. This documentary has not argued for or against ADX Florence. It has not sensationalized its practices or relied on myths. Instead, it has examined the structure as it exists and how something as ordinary as food becomes part of a powerful system of control. One meal at a time. Inside this prison, food does not shout. It does not threaten. It does not punish openly. It simply arrives. And in arriving the same way every day, it teaches a lesson more effectively than force ever could, that the system decides, that resistance changes nothing, that adaptation is the only path forward. For the men inside ADX Florence, this reality is lived daily, quietly, behind concrete and steel. For those on the outside, it remains largely invisible, but it is there, in the silence, in the routine, in the trays sliding through a steel slot. Food, inside America's most secure prison, is not about nourishment. It is about order. And in a place where order is everything, even a simple meal becomes a tool that shapes the human mind, slowly, consistently, and without words. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.